Harley Jane Kozak, and I was born in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I was the youngest of 8 kids, and when I was a baby, my father died, and so my mother moved us across country following her teaching career. So we spent a few years in Valley City, North Dakota, but then in 1963 we came to Lincoln, where my mom had a job teaching at the university in the music department. So I started first grade in Lincoln, and I stayed here until I was 19 when I moved to New York. So I consider Lincoln my hometown. It's really, truly where I grew up. I grew up, as I said, on a farm, and I remember being a child. I was the youngest of the family by 3 years from the next older brother. And I had 3 brothers just older than me, and then my sisters were quite a bit bigger. And my mother was teaching all the time and taught summer school too. And so I spent a lot of time on the farm by myself, isolated. There were no neighbors within walking distance. So I spent a lot of time with the cats and the dogs and my imagination. And there's something for me about those prairies, plains, cornfields, the vast sky that I think feeds the imagination. And I just remember really well sitting on the farm and dreaming of the day when I would move to the big city and be a storyteller. I knew from the beginning that that was where my passion was. In my early years, I really thought that acting was my sole aspiration. But on the side, I was always writing. And when I look back now, it seems that I was the last one to notice that I was really a writer at heart. That didn't emerge until much later, but I always was writing. I was a compulsive writer. As a student, I was the kind of kid who, when everyone else would say, "Oh no, an essay test," I would say, "Oh good, an essay test," because I knew that I could fake my way through any subject if I had enough pieces of paper and room to write instead of answering true-false questions. So I think I was a writer all my life, and it just took me about 30 years to figure that out. Really phenomenal education in Nebraska, the public school system in particular, and it certainly influenced my acting enormously, but I was also very much encouraged, especially at East High, to write. And we had great English teachers, and I also, reading influenced me seriously. I remember one summer, fairly early on, I was probably about 11 or 12, and my mom was teaching, and my brothers had hitchhiked around the country, which they like to do in the summertime, and I really was home alone, literally home alone, and I'd gone through all my age-appropriate books, checked out from the library, which was far away, not walking distance, and I thought, I can't read these one more time. And I noticed my mother's collection of Agatha Christie mysteries, and she had a collection of, there was another writer named Georgette Heyer, who's a British author writing in the 1930s, and she wrote historical novels and mysteries and also Regency romances. And when I discovered Agatha Christie and Georgette Heyer and discovered that I actually could understand them really well, that the sort of Britishisms didn't throw me at all, and I could follow along, the whole world opened up to me, because I realized I was no longer confined to the children's literature, ghetto, and that that was my coming of age in a literary sense. And the summer flew by. I read everything on my mom's mystery shelves, and I think that it took a long time for me to come around to writing my own murder mystery, but I know that the seeds were sown back then. I found the novels of John le Carré and John D. MacDonald, who writes the Travis McGee series, and he's now dead, sadly. And, novels too numerous to count, but within the genre of mystery, thriller, crime fiction, those 2 guys were really big influences on me. And honestly, because I moved around so much, once I left the warm, fuzzy atmosphere of Nebraska and my family and my home and my friends and moved out to the big city, books became really important to me, bridging the gap until I was able to create a life for myself in a family and a social world. you know, in those lonely days when you're setting off into new frontiers, I think books are so wonderful because they connect you to people that you really consider your friends. TV can do that too, but books in a very particular way. And so I would say those guys really did influence me. The series quality also was very reassuring to me. There's something great about, in mystery series in particular, I feel sometimes that the plot is secondary to the characters. Some famous writer, and I'm paraphrasing somebody and I can't remember who, said that the plot is just an excuse to hang out with these interesting people. And that is how I felt about mystery series. So my influences were very much the series mystery writers that I was reading in my 20s. Along with everything else I was always also reading the great playwrights. And there were years, when I went to acting school at NYU, I don't think I read a book for pleasure for 3 years. I was only reading plays, and I was working very hard at that. So reading mysteries became my guilty pleasure. Someone said that the only subjects worthy of writing about are sex and death. And I've just butchered someone else's great quote too. But in crime fiction, that's pretty much a given. And I'd broaden that to say love and death. And obviously there's going to be, in crime fiction, death. Those are the stakes. It really is life and death. There are themes of justice. It's taking a world that is in disorder. When a crime is committed and there are so many questions and the world is thrown into disarray, by the end of the classic murder mystery, order is restored. And there's something very satisfying about that. And I think that's one reason we read them, because we crave that kind of comfort. And someone thinking, well, why would you read a murder mystery? Why would that be comforting? But it is comforting because it says that all mysteries can be solved. There are answers to all of our questions, and that's just not true in life, but that's what fiction and art gets to do, is throw some order into the chaos. So the questions of life and death are inherent in a mystery novel. And then for me personally, I have a very strong romantic streak, and I never outgrew that feeling of happily ever after and riding off into the sunset and what my daughters now experience as the Disney princess phenomenon. It was around when I was growing up too, and that feeling of one day my prince will come and some enchanted evening, and all of those things are really very deeply woven into my psyche. And so I couldn't conceive of writing a book that did not have a really romantic through line, subplot. And while I can't read straight romances, I can read literary fiction that's romantic, but I can't read category genre romances. I just can't. I can read historical ones, but not contemporary present day romances. They just don't really interest me. But they do if they are filtered through another genre, like a murder mystery. So in the course of solving a crime, if two people fall in love, to me that's the most interesting thing. And also the novels of Mary Stuart, who writes very gothic romances. I really loved that as well. So those two themes are in every book that I write. And also, then there are themes of loyalty and friendship, motherhood, father-daughter relationships, all the other themes that interest us. And often it's not until I've finished writing the first or second or third draft of a book that I look at it and say, oh, that's what I've written about. I didn't even know it. I'm always subconsciously working out the themes of my own life during that year or two that I'm writing that book. I have 3 children who are currently 9 years old and 6 and 6. My twins are about to turn 7 next week. So because I sold my first novel when my twins were 3 months old and my oldest child was 2, their life has really, really dominated my life and therefore my writing schedule. So at the beginning I would write when either the babysitter showed up or the children were napping, or later when we had au pairs living with us, I would coordinate with the au pair schedule when I would write. And once they started school, and it's still the case today that my writing life is dominated by their school schedule. They're still little enough that when they're home from school, they demand all of my time, and they will not let me put any quality time into the computer. I might be able to answer an email, but I can't honestly write fiction. But I do write it quite a bit in the car, not when I'm actually driving, but when I'm sitting waiting in the carpool line, or at the car wash, or in a parking lot, or if we get early to the soccer game, or whatever it is. I write a lot on a little portable laptop, and I write whenever I can. In my mystery series, my heroine is Wollie Shelley. She's a greeting card artist living in Los Angeles, and she has her own voice that developed very quickly, almost sprung full-blown into my consciousness with a little bit of tweaking in the early days. I was taking a class at Santa Monica Community College. I'm a lover of extended education, and I'm sure it comes from growing up on the campus of UNL. I mean, this is where we spent our time waiting for my mom to finish teaching and drive us home. So every fall I have this urge to take a class and register somewhere. So I've taken a lot of extension courses and a lot of writing classes. And when Wollie was first born, I thought it was a short story I was writing, and then I realized it was a novel. But I remember my early writing teachers giving me pointers. Like one said, there's a naive quality to her that's engaging, and you should focus on that and don't let her slip into a self-pitying or hostile tone. And that was really good advice. And she didn't. Very quickly, she had her own voice that was not self-pitying or hostile. She's very non-hostile, in fact, non-confrontational, which is odd given the kind of books I write. It provides its own kind of conflict in that she's solving crime, and she's really unsuited for crime solving because she is a non-confrontational, pacifist person who doesn't like guns. But my second writing teacher, who was specifically a writer of crime fiction herself, said she has to have a more proactive approach because you just can't have a passive heroine solving murder mysteries. So I'm always trying to overcome Wollie's inner nature, which wants to sit at home and read a book and put her on the road to solving crimes. But her own voice, the perspective that she has on life, and life in Los Angeles in particular, is just her own, and very easy for me to fall into. It's some sort of alter ego, I guess, but it comes very naturally to me like another language. And when I'm not writing in Wollie's voice, when I'm writing other things, she's always fun to go back to, and I can pick it up very easily, like a friend that you don't talk to for a while, but when you pick up the phone, there they are. I would say when I was starting out, my idea of who I was writing for was a 21-year-old secretary stuck in some boring job in New York City, reading my books on the subway, and then stashing it in her handbag, and then reading it on her lunch hour, and then reading it on her way home from work, and getting through her McJob thinking, I can't wait to get back to my book. And I guess because I was that 21-year-old temp worker, odd job, waiting for my big break as an actress and getting through my less than satisfying jobs by reading fiction. And so I really saw myself as an escapist artist, entertainment being my main function as a novelist. And then if I can illuminate something about the human condition, that's gravy. But mostly I think of myself as an entertainer first. So that was my core audience. Then when I started to publish and tour, I realized that my audience is more likely to be older women. I would say, I'm just guessing, I have no idea, but I would say maybe a 40-year-old woman or a 30-year-old woman or a woman at home with kids or a woman at work with kids. But you know what? I've spoken at book clubs with women who are retired, and I've had my books read by that 20-year-old on the subway, and by quite a number of men who are legitimate, real fans of my writing, which was unexpected to me, but very gratifying. So that makes me think I'm a bit more universal than I initially thought I was. I would say that the best way to write is to do it a lot, to write as much as you can, to write every day. And secondly, to keep reading. I think that's the best inspiration for writing. And I don't mean in that of course, in a plagiaristic way. And sometimes I have to be careful of my own reading habits while I'm writing, because I find myself to be something of a sponge and unconsciously stealing the writing style of others that I admire. But I would say to write a lot and read a lot. There are times when I have not been able to read so much, and I start to question whether I like writing or whether I am a writer. And all it takes is one book that sucks me in and makes me, stay up too late or get up too early or cancel something because I've got to finish the book, to make me remember why I'm writing and how much I love it, and how it has honestly saved my life. In the darkest moments of my life, the lessons I learned from fiction. I love nonfiction too, but honestly, fiction is where my heart is and where I've gotten the most help on how to live a life is through fiction. Oddly enough, I think fiction sometimes is a better vehicle for exploring the truth than nonfiction is. And so I would say read a lot, write a lot, absolutely take classes, because while maybe talent can't be taught, and certainly a compulsion to write can't be taught, but if you have those things in some measure, then a class can teach you everything else that you need to know. And a good writing teacher is really critical, because in the olden days, an editor used to take something, a manuscript, and say, oh, a diamond in the rough. I could turn this into something great. Nowadays, that's just not the case. An editor looks at something and they think, how can I sell this to the sales and marketing department? How can we market this? It's got to be ready to go to the printers. They do not have the time. It's no longer their job to edit your material. If you're a first-time author, if you're a star, it's different, but for a first-time author, you have to write the absolutely best book you're capable of, and whatever it takes to do that. And for me, it took 17 drafts of my first book, 9.5 years, and countless teachers and fellow students and writers groups and 100 people giving their opinion, none of which reached consensus, and then I had to weed through all the criticism and figure out what applied to me and what didn't. But by the time I was done with it, I knew I had the best book I was capable of writing at that moment in time. And then I found fairly quickly an agent, and then very quickly an editor, because I had a very savvy and hardworking agent. But I would say write the best book that's in you to write before you start to send it out in a professional way and get that kind of feedback, because sometimes you only get one shot when you're dealing with editors and agents. But you have endless opportunities among your friends and family, and certainly impose upon them to help you and tell you if it's interesting. And I'm writing my 5th book right now. It's a non-series book. It's my first book I anticipated as being a standalone book. I did not realize my editor would ask me for a sequel and then a 3rd and a 4th book in the series, which was a delightful turn of events. But part of me is eager to explore some other genre. So I'm not moving too far away. I'm moving into the thriller genre. And I want to write in 3rd person instead of the 1st person Wollie voice. I'm interested in exploring different voices and the different structure of a novel that employs 3rd person and multiple viewpoints. So that's what I'm working on
now. Good afternoon. My name is Meredith Mcgowan. I am the curator of the Heritage Room, and I'd like to welcome you to the Heritage Room and to the John H. Ames reading series. We're excited that this reading series has been around for about 25 years. Let me just say for about 25 years. We used to have this reading on Thursday evenings. We don't have Thursday evening hours at Bennett Martin anymore, so now we're here on Sunday afternoon, and I thank you for being here. This is the 183rd reading. Let me get that straight. We are here in the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. It is a special collection, about 13,000 volumes, and it is a representative collection, of course, because we couldn't have everything in here, but we do represent about 3,000, about 3,000 authors. And we do have, if you look around the room, you'll see artwork on the walls. We have information files. We have other memorabilia, manuscripts, all sorts of things. So we do invite you to come back during our regular public service hours. We are open Tuesday through Friday from 12 to 3 and Sunday afternoons from 2 to 5. And actually we're open right now because here you are in the room at this program. If you're watching this on 5 City TV later and you want to know where the room is, it's on the 3rd floor of Bennett Martin Public Library, which is 14th and N Streets downtown in Lincoln. We would also like to thank the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. We're able to bring special programs like this one to you because of an endowment that was established through their volunteer efforts a number of years ago. And by the way, I guess it is worth noting that the Heritage Room is not tax supported. It's operated through that endowment that I just mentioned to you. If you want to find out more about the NLHA, you can look up the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association on the web. And by the way, this is also the NLHA annual meeting. So this is the program going with the NLHA annual meeting that will occur after the Ames reading. So just thought I'd mention it to you today. Our reader today is Harley Jane Kozak. She was born in Pennsylvania, but she lived in Lincoln when she was younger. Went to grade school, elementary school, went to East High School and graduated from there. She also went several semesters to UNL. And then somewhere in there, I believe the acting bug must have bit her because she mentions inspiration from faculty and students at East with regard to acting and at UNL and with the Nebraska Repertory Theater as well. And she has, it seems, tried living on both coasts. I know she was in New York, but now she's in Los Angeles. Apparently Los Angeles has won out, for now anyway, because I think she's been there for more than 20 years. She's here today because the writing bug has also bit her. She writes short stories, she writes nonfiction essays, but I suspect that she's most well known for her mystery series that features amateur detective Wollie Shelley. She's written Dating Dead Men, Dating is Murder, Dead Ex, and now A Date You Can't Refuse. We're very happy to have Harley with us here today. If you could help me welcome her, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Meredith, for that beautiful introduction. And I'm very happy to be here. Some of you are old friends of mine, very dear friends of mine, and some of you I've never met. But I'm in Lincoln for a couple of reasons this week. I'm going back to my acting roots and shooting a short film in conjunction with the Johnny Carson Film School. We're working with the film students. There are, I think, about 10 professionals on the movie set working with the students, and we're just having a wonderful time. And for those of you who don't realize it, you have an extraordinary film school here. And I mean that really seriously. I'm working with some with writer, director, producer, actor, cameraman, cinematographer, props person from New York and LA, and they are equally impressed with the level of commitment and talent and education that's happening here. So you can be really proud of that. And I'm having a wonderful time being an actress, something I haven't done much of in the last 10 years. As was just said, I've been dedicating myself lately to writing, and I also have 3 children. I have twins who are about to turn 7, and I have a 9-year-old. So that is really sort of dictated how my life has gone, and also dictated the fact that I'm still in Los Angeles because my family is there right now. That's, just as you were saying that, I was thinking, oh, but I could live in New York again someday. When I left Nebraska, I made a really conscious decision to go to New York, and I went to the School of the Arts there at NYU, and I really loved New York. And I got a job suddenly after about 9 years of living in New York, and I moved to Los Angeles overnight thinking I'd be back. I just put my stuff in storage, and one thing led to another, and I never went back. It's
it's been 25 years now, and I'm still getting lost in LA. But I do miss New York, so I do think of myself as a bi-coastal person, and then I've got Nebraska right in the middle of the country that keeps pulling me back like a bad penny. And the other thing I'm doing here this week, besides I'm the bad penny, not Nebraska. The other thing I'm doing this week is selling my book, A Date You Can't Refuse. This is the very end of my book tour. So this book came out in March, and I've been at independent bookstores in various places around the country. And Thursday I was at my very favorite Lee Booksellers and had a really wonderful time and a wonderful bunch of friends. And it's kind of, my book tours function as family reunions and, a chance for old friends to get together. So I feel like I'm living a kind of magical life as an author, as I felt also as an actress. But anyway, so I found myself in my mid-30s as my acting career was getting a little bit less interesting, only because I was working mostly in film and television. And for someone who's approaching 40 in film and television, if you're a leading lady, it's not quite so much the case for a character actress, but if you're someone who's skated by a little bit on your looks, things go downhill pretty rapidly at over 40. So I could see the handwriting on the wall approaching, and I had always had a passion for writing. I'd always been writing plays and screenplays and unfinished novels, and so I started to take a class at Santa Monica Community College in Los Angeles, and I discovered to my surprise that writing was not only something that I had some facility for, but something that was equally exciting to me to do, and in some ways much more so than acting, for a couple of reasons. One, I was reaching burnout. I'd been working a lot as an actress, and it was very, very comforting to me to be in a classroom where I was just judged by the quality of my words and the content of my mind and not what I looked like. And the other thing that I discovered was that as an actor, you're a very small part in somebody else's vision. On stage, it's the playwright's vision. In a film, it's the director's vision. And on a television show, it's often the producer's vision. And you're just one small piece of the puzzle. But when you're a novelist, you're the whole puzzle. And that was a very heady experience, having spent my life doing some really wonderful scripts, but some scripts that, frankly made me say, man, I could write better than this. And so then I found myself in a position to find out, could I write better than that? And so that from a short story was born my character, Wollie Shelley, who started out as a character in a piece of literary fiction, and then a dead body showed up, and I found I was writing a murder mystery. And a mere 9.5 years later, I was finished with the book, and then I spent another year looking for an agent who I found, and then she found me an editor and a publisher, and the publisher asked me for a sequel to my first novel, and then for 2 more books. And to my surprise, I found myself writing a mystery series, because I really hadn't set out to do that. But having said that, I couldn't be happier. I'm delighted that I have 4 books to my name, and honestly, I can't tell you how I did it. I could, but, and if you're interested, I will. But my first book I sold when my twins were 3 months old, and I had a 2-year-old as well. And the second 3 books were written, as a mother of very young children. So you can imagine that had its own set of challenges. So as I'm starting a 5th book now, and as I look at the, not blank sheets of paper, but blank computer screen, I think, I don't know how to do this. And I have to actually look at my physical books on the shelf and say, well, somewhere in me I know how to do it because I've done it. But honestly, it feels like reinventing the wheel every time. You know what I'm talking about? You'd think, well, by now she knows what she's doing, but it doesn't feel like I know what I'm doing. But in any case, unless somebody has a question, I think I'll just start talking about my character by reading excerpts from my books. I will start with my first book, Dating Dead Men, was where Wollie was born, and I will I'll start by saying, I write in a genre that's pretty much a classic murder mystery, but I find that my style of writing tends to be, I throw in everything but the kitchen sink. So my plots tend to be fairly dense with subplots and extra characters and stuff. Wollie is a greeting card artist, and that is what she aspires to do, but as with so many artists, she needs a day job because you can't really pay the rent just doing greeting cards unless you're Sandra Boynton or Mary Engelbreit, and she's not. She does alternative cards. But this brings up opportunities to give her lots of really odd jobs, some odder than others, and each book contains an odd job. In part because my editor loved the fact that in my first book, Wollie is dating 40 men in 60 days as part of a scientific research project for a radio talk show host who's writing a self-help book called How to Avoid Getting Dumped All the Time. And Wollie is functioning as one of the case studies, and she's dating in a very structured way. And my editor so loved this plot that she asked me to have Wollie dating in each of the books. And so something that I had come up with and thought, well, this is pretty wacky, but I'll have some fun with this, turned out to be something that I became married to for each of my subsequent books. So she's not dating in that way in each book, but she has to have a dating element in each book. So she also has to discover a dead body and get somehow involved in the crime in a compelling enough way to make her stay with it even as the stakes go up and up and up, and she finds herself facing death, which is pretty much a staple item in a murder mystery. So we have corpses, we have life and death stakes, we have dating, we have greeting cards, we have whatever odd job she's doing, and then she's got a brother, an uncle, a mother, two best friends, and a man that she's in love with, which is not necessarily the same in every book. But with all that said, let me start early on in Dating Dead Men. She's right in the middle of the dating project. This is date number 19, Dave. And she's at the end of the date. It has not been going well. They're at a restaurant in Malibu, which is fairly cold. It's an outdoor restaurant. She's having a miserable time for a couple of reasons. Among them, her brother, PB, who is a paranoid schizophrenic and living in a mental hospital up the coast from LA, about 45 minutes up the coast. He's off his medication at the moment because he had some surgery on his foot, and there was the doctors were worried about the medication. So he's off his anti-hallucinogen medication, so he's having hallucinations, and he calls Wollie, and he is begging her to deliver to him some aluminum foil, which he feels is necessary to keep aliens from reading his thoughts. And so Wollie knows that these are hallucinations. Nevertheless, she is responsible for her brother, so she agrees to do this after her date. So that's where we are. Back at my table, Dave picked up where he'd left off on his travelogue with chaos, a mathematical theory explaining behavior that seems to be random but turns out not to be. This was my favorite part, hearing what the dating project guys did for a living. On previous dates, I'd learned about perchlorethylene, a cancer-causing chemical used by dry cleaners, the air conditioning system at LA Community College, weightlifting, divorce settlements, zoning laws, the Talmud, how copper conducts heat, and how Pizarro conquered Peru. Now I learned that randomness and chaos are not the same thing. While random is random, chaos is not. If you can find the pattern in chaos, you can change it. I loved that. I was mentally composing my journal entry on Dave, not a people person, when he reached across the table and stroked my wrist. His fingernails were buffed. "You have really soft skin," he said. "Goosebumps, though. Are you cold?" 7 minutes to go, I thought. 420 seconds. "I'm fine," I said. "My apartment is warm." He smiled, as if he were trying out a new set of teeth. This was the worst part of dating, maybe for everyone, but certainly for me. In addition to the 2-hour minimum, Dr. Cookie had spelled out our official standards of behavior on dates. No crying jags, or sitting in stony silence, or running, screaming into the night. No assault, no bringing a book. Mindful of all this, I muttered a simple, "No thank you, Dave." "Come on, Wollie. Your place is far away. It'll be so late by the time we get there." "It's Wollie," I said, "and it'll be later if we go to your house first." I began to calculate how much driving I had ahead of me to Rio Pescado Hospital, and then I saw he was still smiling, waiting for an answer. But what was the question? "Oh, yes." "I can't stay over," I said. "I can't sleep with you." His smile faded. "Why not?" "I don't want to." Dave looked around impatiently and snapped his fingers. "Check." "He's not our waiter," I said. "That's Christian. Ours is Jonathan." "Who cares?" I ended up taking a cab home. Dave paid half. My VW Rabbit zoomed up the 101 north past the Denny's, McDonald's, and International House of Pancakes of Woodland Hills, Westlake Village, and Thousand Oaks. I drove without the radio, a habit left over from the days when a trip to Rio Pescado made me nervous to the point of nausea. I thought about how it was now more fun to go to the mental hospital than it was to go on a date. And I wondered if that was progress. I had dressed haphazardly in the interest of speed and warmth. My long calico skirt from earlier in the day, heavy wool socks over my tights, red high-top Converse All-Stars, gray hooded sweatshirt, jean jacket. Nothing matched, and it didn't matter. It's hard to dress wrong for the hospital. On the seat next to me were 75 square feet of Reynolds Wrap quality aluminum foil. In my jacket pocket was a Regency romance, Sylvester or the Wicked Uncle. A useful thing to know about mental illness, which you won't find in pamphlets or medical textbooks like the DSM-4, is how much time is spent by everyone involved waiting at hospitals, pharmacies, police stations, or on hold, which is why it's important to carry reading material at all times or a portable hobby like needlepoint or whittling. After 40 minutes, the terrain changed dramatically. Flat, complacent communities gave way to a sweeping vista as the freeway snaked around canyon curves high above the valley floor. I took the Pleasant Valley exit. Entering the little town at midnight was disorienting, like spotting the cleaning lady at an after-hours club. But I made the drive to the hospital most Thursdays at noon, so it didn't take long for my internal compass to kick in. My rabbit bounced along past the corn and onion fields until the deer crossing sign reminded me to slow down. And so, when the shape loomed in the road ahead, there was plenty of time to imagine what else it might be, must be, other than the thing it was, until I'd come to a gradual, disbelieving stop. I kept the motor running, and I covered my wide-open eyes with my hands like that would make it go away. I reached over to lock the doors in the rabbit even though they were already locked. And I told myself that the thing in front of the car wasn't what it appeared to be. Finally, reason rolled in like the tide. With all the things that existed only in my brother's head, this one also existed in the real world. Dead body, cadaver, corpse. All right, so then we move ahead about a chapter. Wollie has delivered to her sleeping brother the aluminum foil. She has basically snuck into the hospital. They're a little bit relaxed about security here, and but she's not supposed to be there, and she's very concerned about that dead body that she has ascertained is dead, and for several reasons, she cannot have that body associated with her brother. She's very much aware that he may have had something to do with it, and she's very scared on his behalf. So she's now trying to make her exit. She's been up to his room, dropped off the tinfoil, and she hasn't seen a soul yet in the hospital. She goes to the elevator. The hallway was empty, but the elevator was not. Inside was a gurney, empty. Next to the gurney stood a man. I froze. In addition to a white lab coat, he wore a green scrub suit, complete with paper hair cover and shoe covers. Only his face was exposed, a Mediterranean-looking face with dark eyes and darker eyebrows and the beginning of a beard. Just my type, I thought, surprising myself, and felt a wave of desire so inappropriate I chalked it up to post-traumatic stress syndrome. He didn't ask what I was doing there at that hour. He didn't say a word. I stayed frozen until the elevator began to close, and then I snapped out of it and came aboard. He held the door open button. I started to say thank you, and then I stopped. Opening my mouth could activate my honesty compulsion, especially potent around authority figures such as doctors. Already, I had an impulse to grab him and say, "I've just seen a dead body." Instead, I pressed one and lowered my head so he wouldn't get a good look at my face. His paper slippers had no shoes in them, only socks. That struck me as strange. The elevator went past the first floor and continued to descend. We were headed for the former morgue in the basement. I stepped closer to the man. His body heat was palpable. His head was bent, looking at the paperback in my jacket pocket, Sylvester or the Wicked Uncle. Oh, for heaven's sakes, why couldn't I be reading something hip? Jack Kerouac or somebody. Nietzsche. With a creaking that cried out for an application of WD-40, the doors opened. 2 men stood waiting, security guards. The guards looked at us and then at each other. As the elevator doors rumbled shut, they hurried through. The doctor did not hold the door open button for them. I was now practically stapled to the back wall, slightly behind the doctor. My doctor, as I was beginning to think of him. Not a serial killer, I decided, but an ally. I was close enough to see the perspiration on his neck curling a lock of hair that had escaped the scrub suit cap. I could smell his smell. The top of his head was level with my eyes, which put his height at about 5, 6, or 7. Short, sweaty. I wanted him. We waited for the elevator to move. The guards, it seemed to me, were staring at the doctor's feet, perhaps noticing, as I had, his strange footwear. The doctor must have sensed my scrutiny because he turned. His eyes looked up into mine and stayed there. "Read my mind," they seemed to say, and then he winked. The 2 men took turns pushing the one button, the way you do when you want to make things happen faster, and the uniformed one threw a look back at us. A hand, his hand, wrapped around my wrist and readjusted to grasp my fingers. What a shocking thing to do, I thought. How thrilling. With a clang and a hum, the elevator ascended. From the pocket of the lab coat where the doctor's hand had been, the hand that now held mine, there emerged the snout and then the face of a small white animal. I stared at the animal. It stared back. The doctor squeezed my hand, and now I was absolutely sure he was telling me something, only I had no idea what. I squeezed back in an, "I don't know what you're saying, but I like you" manner. He squeezed again. "I like you too," I decided it meant. When the elevator doors opened, the security guard stepped out and turned, clearing a space for us to exit. Then they stood there, waiting for me. I didn't move. The doctor let go of my hand and said, "After you." He had the voice of a much more macho man, the voice Mike Tyson should have gotten. I liked it. I wanted to hold his hand some more. I said, "No, that's all right." "Go," he said more forcefully. It showed good manners, but there are situations that override standard etiquette. "Gurneys first," I said courteously. "Fine." He pushed the gurney out, and then he stepped back, reached around, and grabbed onto I think he was going for my arm, but he found my breast instead, and he fumbled around, and I stumbled against him, and then his arm was around my waist, and I was being held tight against him, and I thought, wow. And then he spoke again. "Nobody moves, or she gets it." So let's see. All right, so that's the beginning of Wollie's romance in book 1. And let's see, I think I'm going to leave book 1 and move on to book 2, Dating is Murder. All right, this is almost the opening of book 2. And it opens with Wollie and her best friends who are always at her side, Joey and Frederic. And Joey and Frederic are very important in Wollie's life and in my life as the author of mysteries, because Wollie has no aptitude for crime solving. She's a very introverted person. She would rather be home designing greeting cards than on the road chasing anybody. She's not a very good driver. She has no physical courage. And so I have given her 2 best friends that make up in chutzpah what she lacks. And so this is the opening of book 2. My friends were driving me to the night's location. Oh, I should tell you. I'm about to tell you. It's going to describe Biological Clock, which is a reality show. My friends were driving me to the night's location of Biological Clock. The reality show featured 3 women d'un certain âge, as Joey put it, dating in rotation 3 men of various ages, so the TV audience could ultimately vote on which combination of genes should produce a child, with or without romantic involvement on the part of the chosen couple. I was one of the women. It hadn't been my idea. Joey's husband had invested money in this reality show, Biological Clock, which had inspired Joey and Frederic to send my audition video to the casting director. I hadn't known that I had made an audition video. I thought I was being interviewed for Frederic's niece's sociology project. Apparently, though, me talking about my dating history was compelling stuff. Also, I was the right age and had the attributes, big chest, long legs, and height, 6 feet of it, that made me a nice visual contrast to the other 2 front-runner women contestants, and I had thus beaten out several hundred hopefuls for the job. Not that I'd wanted the job. I'd turned it down flat once it was explained to me. I found the premise of the show cheesy, despite the disclaimer at the end of each episode that no couple would be required to have sex or bear children. As for fame, I'd have been very happy to fork over my 15 minutes to someone else, the way that senators give away their floor time in debates to fellow senators. But then Biological Clock had mentioned money. Despite the low budget, I would be paid $500 a week for 2 nights' work, unusual for reality TV. And that wasn't all. The producers had invested in a number of other businesses, including a health maintenance organization offering benefits to the winning contestants and their dependents, current and future. Some people say insurance isn't sexy, but for those with dependent, paranoid, schizophrenic brothers on pricey antipsychotic medication, it's sexy enough. All right, so that's the world that Wollie is inhabiting in the second book, Biological Clock. Now, because my editor asked me in the sequel to have Wollie dating again and falling in love again, I dispatched the love of her life from book 1 to Asia. And because for my purposes, I needed Wollie to be free to find a new love interest. So here we are. Wollie is she's filming an episode of Biological Clock. She's on the movie set, and they've taken a small break. They're waiting for the expert to show up, one of the cast members, and he's late. So they've called a small break. So Wollie is at it's in a strip mall, and it's like on the 2nd floor. And she steps out for a bit of fresh air, and she's on the cell phone, and she hangs up her cell phone, and she notices there's a man who's been lurking in the shadows. The man turned to me. His eyes were blue. It must have been a trick of the moonlight because they looked transparent. This intrigued me. "Something I can help you with?" I said. "Yeah." I expected him to elaborate, but he didn't. He seemed to be studying me, and I felt myself blush. I turned to go again. "Wait," he said. "Do me a favor, walk away from this." "Well, which is it?" I said. "Wait or walk away?" "I think you understand me." Perhaps he was mentally ill. I often attract mentally ill people. I feel an affinity for them, probably from years of dealing with my brother's schizophrenia. Also, the mentally ill can have the most beautiful eyes. Why is that? "This thing you're walking into," he continued, "get out." I said the first thing that occurred to me, "Get out of Biological Clock?" "What?" "I think you understand me," I said. 2 could play this enigmatic game. He said to me, "You think you can't get hurt?" What a strange thing to say. I'd been hurt quite a lot, I could have told him. Who in life had not? But his face was so hard, except for those eyes, that I was not tempted to bare my soul to it. He'd been leaning on the railing, but now he straightened up, and I was aware of how very tall he was, and I'm 6 feet myself. He looked down at me. "You think you're that pretty?" I stared at him. If only I had a clue what he was talking about. He leaned in close. He smelled clean. "You are that pretty, but you'll go down just the same." The words paralyzed me, and then suddenly, bing, the director's voice broke the spell. "Our expert's coming," he yelled from the doorway. "Let's go, folks." The tall man walked away. He didn't look back. He just headed for the stairs, not even acknowledging he'd heard me when I called after him. But what is it I've done? Okay, so the next time, all right, so quite a bit of time has passed. We're now at Thanksgiving. It's the morning of Thanksgiving, and Wollie's mother, who has just reappeared in her life after some absence, has invited herself into Wollie's apartment, and she's staying with Wollie, to Wollie's consternation. And she has invited this strange man that we just met, who's become Wollie's friend, and turns out to be an FBI agent. She has invited him to Thanksgiving brunch. Wollie's not happy about this. She has a family that she's not particularly ready to thrust a new romantic interest on. Her uncle has also been invited. His name is Uncle Theo. She's very fond of him. He's a little avant-garde, and her brother is on leave from the hospital, and he's no longer hallucinating, by the way. He's fully recovered from that episode that happened in book 1. Nevertheless, Wollie doesn't want her new boyfriend to meet these people. She has a very, very liberal family, and he's an FBI agent. She suspects he's a Republican. She doesn't think this is going to be a good fit at all. Uncle Theo said, the guy's name is Simon, the FBI agent. Uncle Theo said, "Care for some weed, Simon?" "Uncle Theo," I said, "I don't think your mother felt it would be festive," he said, and he pulled a baggie out of his poncho pocket and he sat at the kitchen table. "Went to some lengths to find it, but I have friends who still turn on, it turns out. Estelle and I used to do this every Thanksgiving. When did that stop, Estelle?" 1968, my mother said. She popped open the champagne. "We did a blotter of acid, 7 of us, and tried to contact Bobby Kennedy." "The seance," Uncle Theo cried. "The one that turned you vegan. The turkey coming to life, crying out from the stuffing." I spoke up. Okay, could we just not? "The noble bird," my mother said, "exploited as we honor it. Just as we honor the Native Americans at Thanksgiving. Where is the Native American at our table? Do we respect his heritage? Do we join him in his sweat lodge, worship his gods, or do we just gamble at his casino? We may love peyote. We may engage in sex with... "Screw the government, PB," my brother said, surprising us all. Richard Feynman, the physicist, said that. Everybody, I said, we may be giving our guests the impression that, Simon, would you care to see the rest of the apartment? "No, I think we should help out here," Simon said, and he took the champagne glasses from my mother and filled the glasses. He offered one to my brother, but PB, having made his social contribution, retreated into gloom. "None for him," Uncle Theo said. "They interfere with his psychotropics." "Drugs," he added helpfully. The next hour brought back memories of the first half of my life. In a kitchen the size of a phone booth, Simon watched my mother and uncle get high, while PB sat like a lump, staring at the radio as if reading lips. My brother had spent years seeing government agents everywhere, and now, faced with an actual one, he was unresponsive. My mother was not. She was coquettish. Even wrangling pots and pans, she sipped champagne, smoked grass, and played hostess. "What is your life path, Simon?" "What do I do for a living?" he said. He turned his stunning blue eyes on me and smiled. I stopped breathing. "I work for peace," he said. "Research, documentation, trips to bad neighborhoods." "Do you approve of this television program Wollie has sold herself to?" "Mother, let's leave that for now, shall we?" I relocated the men in order to set the table. "Simon is very tall. He must be hungry. Do we have any hors d'oeuvres?" Hors d'oeuvres. What a fantasy life I led. The entire meal consisted of sprouts, tofu cranberry bake, undercooked yams, and Uncle Theo's day-old Kaiser rolls. I found some wheat thins to supplement things, but my mother forbade me to bring out cheese or even butter for the Kaiser rolls, citing the exploitation of cows. We were not meant to drink bovine milk, she said, but human breast milk. I intended to breastfeed Wollie and PB until kindergarten, but I had inverted nipples. "I never realized that, Estelle," Uncle Theo said. My mother continued, "We choose our parents prior to birth. My children chose intellect, creativity, and spiritual acuity over normal nipples. For them to resent me now is pointless. And, Mom," I said, I mean, Estelle, had you offspring of your own, Wollie, you would empathize. At your age, you'll probably stay single, as well as barren. As for your brother, in that regard, the less said, the better. Then why don't you say less, I said, instead of talking about him as if he weren't there, especially since you haven't said one nice thing. Simon put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture powerful enough to stop me. If the moment was tense for me, I seemed to be in the minority. PB continued to arrange wheat thins in a pattern on the counter. My mother looked up in bland surprise. Uncle Theo took a healthy bite of tofu, cranberry bake. What about you, Simon? My mother said. In your work, I'm sure that you... Oh, sorry, I skipped a... let me see. Anyway. Okay, so something else happens. And then, what about you, Simon? My mother said. In your work, I'm sure that you eschew unsolicited intervention. Oh, she's making a case for detachment among family members, not being quite so close in a familial way. That depends, Mrs. Shelley, Simon said. He took his hand from my neck, and he turned to her. He was so tall the movement seemed to rearrange the kitchen. If I'm following this conversation, you're asking what I would do if I lost someone I cared about. I would intervene. I'd exploit all resources available to me and some that aren't. I'd walk away from my job, house, friends, and in the end, if necessary, I would kill anyone who stood between me and the person in question. My mother's eyebrows were nearly vertical with surprise. Uncle Theo regarded Simon with genial interest. PB stopped arranging wheat thins and looked up. Simon reached for my hand. Wally, he said, I think we need to walk off those sprouts. Let's go. So now Wally is, she's made a rendezvous with Simon late at night, and she's sitting in her car doing one of her favorite occupations, which is designing greeting cards. I'd been doing a line of condolence cards, initially inspired by my broken engagement. There is no end to things deserving of sympathy. Sorry about that canceled wedding, led to sorry about your cholesterol levels, sorry that your house has mold. I finished with sorry you flunked, and was starting a new one, sorry about your biological father, when a knock on the building's glass door made me jump. I snapped my sketchbook shut and went outside to meet Simon Alexander. Nice office, he said, indicating my lobby. He took my sketchbook. May I? I nodded, watching him study my work. He had changed clothes since this morning, different dress shirt, different dark pants, no tie. He turned the pages slowly, studying each as if they were directions to buried treasure. I realized I was holding my breath. Finally, he closed my sketchbook and handed it back. I like your mind, he said. I let out my breath. So that's when Wally realizes that he is probably the one for her. And I'm going to jump now to the end of the book. Wally has just saved her own life, essentially, in the sort of requisite mano-a-mano scene that happens in every murder mystery, where she has to do combat with the bad guy. And it's, in this case, it's hand-to-hand combat, and she finds an unlikely weapon, and she's not sure if she has killed this person or not, but she has essentially escaped from them. And so the moment of death has passed. And she's waiting. She's locked in the building with the person that she may or may not have killed. I dialed 911. They asked me questions. I answered them. I hung up. I sneezed, and then I waited. Life is short. That's one of those things that occurs to you when you glimpse death, yours or anybody's. You think, I'll remember this. This will remind me not to waste time. But you forget. You carry on like you have several hundred years to live, and like it matters if some guy now living in Taiwan who once loved you still does, or if you pass a math test, or win a reality TV show, or finish the frog mural, or get your car washed before the end of the year. When all that really matters is that you're not dead. The rest of it, like what that means in the long run, or what I was feeling right at the moment, I couldn't sort it out. I didn't know if that person was or wasn't dead, and I knew that this distinction would make a big difference in the lives of many people, me among them, but for the moment, I didn't care. I had that person's gun on the top step away from the cat, and I had the meat mallet. There were no sounds below me, the sounds of a human being rallying. If I were a different sort of person, a brave one, for instance, I might have gone down to see if I could do something about that person, like revive them or maybe tie them up. but I was the person I was, so I stayed where I was, crouched and tense, and concentrating on steady, shallow breaths, thinking about being alive and sneezing. So obviously Wollie survives that book. I'm going to read a bit from my third book, Dead X. All right, this is another one of the things that happens when you're dealing in crime fiction. You have to deal with cops. Nearly every book deals with cops because obviously they're the people that are really in charge of solving crimes, and it's always a challenge when you're dealing with an amateur sleuth to figure out how does she insert herself into a murder investigation when, as a matter of fact, cops don't like that at all, and they really discourage civilians from getting involved. And so every book she has to deal with this in one way or another. And what's useful sometimes is to know somebody in the police department if you're an amateur. And so she does have a friend in the police department named Pete Szymanski. But in this book, she's not able to draw on Pete. There's the dead body in question is an old boyfriend of Wollie's and also an old boyfriend of her best friend Joey's. Joey is the main suspect in the case, which is what it is that keeps getting Wollie involved. She's decided that the cops have decided that Joey's the killer and that it's up to her to do everything she can to help Joey save her own life. And let me see. It's New Year's Eve. Joey and Wollie are driving to a party. Joey's they're both in cocktail attire, and Wollie's driving. Joey is wearing, she has a Glock. She likes guns, unlike Wollie, and she's packing a pistol, and she has a specially constructed bra that actually holds a small handgun. Not that a Glock is very small, but in any case, she's wearing it. And they're on the freeway. Joey's very upset for a couple of reasons, and they notice that there's a cop behind them with its siren going. Oh, sorry, give me a second. I've lost my page. Okay, so he stops them and he comes over to the car. From what I could see, he was on the young side of 30, in a sand-colored California Highway Patrol uniform. Not bad looking. Okay, he wasn't good looking either. Not that it mattered. It's not like I was going to turn on the charm, because honestly, whatever charm I possess has no on-off button. I need to see some ID for you too, he said to Joey while looking at my registration. Joey is panicking, by the way, at this point, knowing that she doesn't have a license to carry a concealed weapon, and this is going to land her in really big trouble if he frisks her. Okay, Joey said, but look, I don't even know this chick. She was just nice enough to give me a ride. I stared at Joey, wondering what I was supposed to make of that. He was writing now, still holding the registration. You girls been drinking? I had espresso, I said, an hour ago, a double. I've been drinking, officer, Joey said. In fact, I might need to throw up. Is it okay if I step outside the car to do that? He moved back, as if she might hurl all over him. Hold on, he said, and talked into his radio, requesting backup. Backup? Just how sick did he expect Joey to be? He repeated his request, asking for a female officer to assist in a search of 2 female suspects. Then he told Joey to stay where she was, but to vomit out the window if necessary. He stepped back but kept talking to me from her side of the car. This vehicle is registered to a Thomas Flynn, he said, referring to the registration. Who are you? I'm Wollie Shelley, I said, my mind reeling from the prospect of getting searched. Doc, Thomas Flynn, was my fiancé, but, well, actually, by now I was supposed to be Mrs. Thomas Flynn, but it didn't work out. But he gave you the car? Yes, he felt it was the least he could do. Can he verify this? Yes, if you can find him, certainly. Where is he? Asia. For how long? 5, 6 years. I have proof of insurance, though, in my purse, my handbag. All right, when you can safely exit the vehicle, do so, and open up the trunk. I glanced at Joey, who nodded at me and smiled almost imperceptibly. How could she be so calm? Even a half-hearted frisk would reveal the gun under her arm, and then what? I got out slowly, unnerved by the cars whizzing by on the freeway, and walked to the back of the car slowly, as though I might grow more intelligent with time. The officer stood by the right rear fender and kept the flashlight on me while I sorted through trunk junk. Perhaps he thought I'd emerge with a submachine gun or a vicious dog. Probably that happened all the time in Los Angeles, the birthplace of road rage. I stalled as long as I reasonably could, but I had no inspired thoughts on what to do. So finally, I turned to him, evening bag in hand, which was when I saw movement 20 feet ahead of the Integra, streaking toward the exit ramp. It was Joey, sprinting into the night. The thing about Joey is, she's a runner. She's got small breasts and long legs and no body fat, and to her, jogging is a good time. She's one of those people out doing it at midnight or in the midst of a rainstorm, making you wonder if she's got an Olympic event coming up. So it didn't surprise me that she'd try to outrun a cop. Why she chose to was another story, but she must have considered it to be in my best interest because Joey would never just ditch me. I saw her a full 6 seconds before he did, and by the time it occurred to me to stop gawking, it was too late. He spotted her. She was now a flash in the distance, at a full-out sprint, disappearing down the exit ramp. "Stop! Halt!" he yelled. "Run, Joey, run!" I screamed, but I had the good sense to keep it in my head. She was on the shoulder, thank God. The cars must have appreciated that, as no one wanted to end the year by mowing down an overdressed jogger. I had to give the cop credit. He started after her, but after a dozen or so yards, he slowed and then stopped. He was a little on the chubby side and fully clothed in heavy shoes, holding a big flashlight, while Joey had a good head start, a runner's body, and carried nothing but a gun in her lingerie. The cop headed back to me, talking into his radio. He was not happy. His gait was heavy and aggressive now, and his words came in angry sound bites. "Long red hair, mid to late 20s. It was nice of him to underestimate her age by 10 years. But the fact was, police everywhere were going to be looking for Joey now. "Up against the car," he yelled at me. I complied. He didn't frisk me. He did something truly unnecessary. He handcuffed me. I don't suppose anyone really likes to be handcuffed, unless her taste runs to bondage, which mine doesn't, although I try to be open-minded. But my problem was not with being restrained. It was that I'm well endowed. With no arms, I felt exposed like two breasts with a head attached, like I was practicing for my Playboy centerfold shoot. Not that this cop had any prurient interest in me, but there was a lot of traffic on the 405, and I could only hope that I wasn't distracting. I sure as heck was cold. I didn't bring up these concerns because the guy was hopping mad. He made me perch on the guardrail rather than have me sit in my car, which I found mean-spirited. When another California Highway Patrol car parked behind us on the shoulder of the freeway, he pushed me into the passenger seat of his own car and buckled me up, still handcuffed, which meant I was effectively straitjacketed. He walked back to his colleagues, and after a time I heard his voice raised in indignation. Maybe losing a suspect, what we were suspected of, I don't know, wasn't going over well with the other cops, especially a suspect on foot, in a cocktail dress, and patent leather shoes. And how would I protect her? If fleeing the scene of a routine traffic stop was against the law, then Joey would see the new year from jail, if they found her. So it was imperative that they didn't find her. L.A. County Jail is a place people talk about the way they used to speak of that prison where they kept the Count of Monte Cristo. Not that jail's ever a good time. Mugshots, strip searches, hanging with a bad crowd. The three officers approached me. One was a woman, and it was she who helped me out of the car, patted me down, uncuffed me, gave me a breathalyzer test, held up a finger, instructed me to follow it with my eyes, and then I was re-handcuffed, put into the backseat of the squad car, and shoulder harnessed, which was as comfortable as lounging in a rock quarry. "Okay, who's your friend?" The original cop, whose name tag said Kranzlauer, got in the driver's seat, poised to write down my full testimony on a small notepad. He'd been nice enough on first meeting me, but that was then and this was now. Maybe his belligerence was for the benefit of the woman officer who sat in the front passenger seat. I took a deep breath. "Officer Kranzlauer, am I pronouncing that right? I'm often the designated driver at times like these because, as we have legally established, I'm not much of a drinker. That being the case, what's her name?" "You see," I said, "we met tonight in a parking lot in front of Vaughn's, the grocery store in Studio City, and I had no plans for New Year's Eve, and she had a party to go to, and I didn't intend to drink, and she did, and what with the price of gas, carpooling always seems to be—" "You don't know her name?" he said. Not absolutely. This was true. Until Joey's marital status was sorted out, was she or wasn't she Joey Horowitz? "What struck me," I said, is that my mother named me after Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, and so because she has the name of, blood was rushing to Kranzlauer's face. Are you telling me you have no idea who that woman was? I said, I'm bad at names. Isn't everyone? The trick is you're supposed to repeat someone's name immediately after you meet them, and whose party were you going to, he said. A little French restaurant on Little Santa Monica was what she said. I was discovering something extraordinary about myself. If I stuck to the truth, not the whole truth, of course, I could do this. It was pouring out of me now. In fact, I wasn't even breaking a sweat lying. Who's giving this party? Kranzlauer barked. Hold on, I said. Let me just adjust my handcuffs. There. The party, it was hosted by, I'm not sure, a law firm maybe. As I said, she was the invitee. Let me get this straight, Kranzlauer said. You were going to a party you weren't invited to, where you wouldn't know anybody, and you were giving a ride to a total stranger. He leaned over the front seat to get in my face. Are you a lesbian? No. I mean, not to my knowledge. I mean, I'm currently in a heterosexual relationship, and I'm pretty happy. Where is he tonight? The female cop asked. Working, I said. He's in textiles. Okay, this wasn't so good. I had to stick to the truth. Where's this woman live? Kranzlauer asked. Her, I'm not sure, I said. This was also true in the sense that Joey might not be the actual owner of the house she was living in. Hadn't the locks been changed repeatedly? I said I'd probably just have dropped her back at the grocery store where she left her car. I thought you said she'd been drinking, that you were the designated driver. Well, yes, true. I mean, assuming she was sober, I would drop her off, naturally. Kranzlauer glared at me, but I was able to look him in the eye. I kept my expression limpid. One thing I had going for me was orange hair, which even more than blondness had to lower people's expectation of my intelligence and my judgment. Kranzlauer checked his clipboard. Is this your current address on your license? No, I've had a few places since then. Where do you live now? Pasadena? With your boyfriend? No. No. You don't live with your boyfriend? The female cop asked. This was making me nervous. No. Although I've spent a lot of time there lately, I said. Wilshire and Westwood. What's his name? She asked. Whose? Your boyfriend. Why do you need to know his name? I was suddenly panicked. What could they possibly want with Simon? Does he know you're driving a car registered to your old lover? Kranzlauer's tone was rude now. Anger is one thing, but is rudeness ever necessary? Yes, he knows. I said, it's not a problem. Well, what's his name? The woman cop wouldn't give up. She obviously had boyfriend issues. Happily, her cell phone rang and she stepped out of the car to answer it. Well, Kranzlauer said, what's his name? Simon? What? Simon? Kranzlauer asked, what kind of name is that? Hebrew, I think. Simon what? I coughed and mumbled Alexander, which came out approximately bub geezer. Kranzlauer didn't even take a crack at that. Back to this situation, he said, what was going on with you two when I pulled you over? What do you mean? With you driving erratically and her waving her arms. Have you ever heard of car dancing? No. You know, when you hear a song that just makes you want to dance, but you're in a car, so you have to pour all your moves into your upper body. You've never heard of that? He stared at me. Lady, I saw a car swerving like a potential accident hazard and a woman carrying on like I don't know what. Maybe she was being held against her will. Against her will, I said, mildly shocked. Wouldn't she have asked you to rescue her if that were the case? He had no answer to that. Did I see a bungee cord in your trunk? He asked suddenly. Oh, you saw my bungee cord, I said. That's great news. I thought I'd lost it. He glanced at the woman cop still on the phone, then back to me. All right. What do you think made her run off like that? Officer, I said, the world is so filled with disturbed people following strange impulses, it amazes me that most of us still manage to get out of bed and make it to work. Maybe she hears voices. I know I do. That did it. Kranzlauer clearly did not hear voices, and he didn't want me hearing them either. He leaned back, away from me. What kind of voices do you hear? At first I thought it was Agamemnon, I said, but lately I've been thinking Zeus. At that point, the woman opened the car door and told him that she and her partner were taking off to check out a possible 23-152 northbound on the 405. Her manner made me think she was higher up in the food chain than Kranzlauer. He told her he might book me on a 207. She stared at him, then asked him to step away from the car. I couldn't hear it all because of the freeway traffic, but the woman said the watch commander would not go for a 207 based on a bungee cord. A radio squawked. A minute later, Kranzlauer came back, undid my cuffs, and told me it was my lucky day. If I wasn't just called in on an 1179, you'd be on your way to getting booked for kidnapping and maybe even car dancing, he said. Get out of here. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me. That really pisses me off. Go. Just go. Because can I tell you something? I don't like you. And I really don't like your hair. Well, you know what? I've taken up an hour of your life, and I think I'm going to stop there. I didn't get to my fourth book, but it's, I would hope that it's my best book, as most of us writers like to think we get better with each progressive book. So that's it. The story of Wollie continues in book number 4, obviously, and I'm so pleased to have had an opportunity to read aloud to you. So thank you for bearing with me and staying awake, and thank you.